Hello, this is Dr. Dan Kahinka. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, and today I'd like to talk to you about what it is to create a leadership culture. The focus of today's presentation will be on servant leadership. Servant leadership is something that I extensively research and have written about, and based on my education in the area of leadership, what I've learned is that servant leadership arguably is at the foundation of most any approach to leadership or most any style of leadership. What we'll focus on today is how creating particularly a servant leadership culture can lead to positive solutions to most any global challenge that we're facing. I will definitely emphasize throughout this presentation not just servant leadership, but just leadership in general. Positive, constructive leadership is greatly lacking in societies and in the workplace, and we are in great need of positive leaders to challenge some of those really significant problems that we have in our societies around the world. When you look at leadership and culture and the development of what you might call a leadership culture, there are many types of approaches to leadership that you might consider. Here's just a few. Adaptive leadership, where you essentially change your leadership style based on the circumstances. That could include global circumstances like a pandemic. It could include local situations and challenges, perhaps loss of employees, an economic downturn, whatever it may be. That's an adaptive style. Authentic leadership is actually part of servant leadership, although there's a significant amount of research on the concept of authentic leadership. And what that would mean is the leader, or in this case, let's say a manager, to be an authentic leader would be transparent. In other words, they will explain their actions. They will recognize if they do something that is either not appropriate or a wrong decision, a poor decision, whatever it may be. They're willing to recognize these errors and openly communicate them with their followers. That's being an authentic leader. Charismatic leader would be someone that is very influential. Many times a charismatic leader is someone we think of as giving different speeches to large audiences and can really grasp the attention of individuals, also at maybe an interpersonal level. I would argue that it's very difficult, perhaps if not impossible, to have really a charismatic leadership culture. Now, charismatic individuals could contribute to a culture. In other words, if let's say the CEO, the chief executive officer, or the president of a major corporation is very charismatic and they want to promote a leadership culture, they might be able to do that because of their charisma. But to actually have a charismatic culture, I think is something that's perhaps, I don't want to say impossible, but something that wouldn't necessarily be pursued or desired. Transformational culture, definitely possible, and transformational leadership is something that is on the forefront of many scientific studies and individuals within the workplace that promote leadership will oftentimes use the word transformational leader. You can have a culture that is focused on transformation and innovation. However, again, as I'll talk about after a while, even there, you still need those basic behaviors and values of a servant leader to have a very effective transformational culture. Transactional culture, inclusive, a team-based culture, all of these things are different, there are different forms or focuses of leadership, different leadership styles, but as we will talk about next, we would still need the various behaviors of the servant leader to really create a highly effective leadership and a leader-oriented culture. By the way, the picture here, Robert Greenleaf has been credited in America as one of the or the founder of the concept of servant leadership. He states here, good leaders must first become good servants, and the notion of servant leadership is to serve the individuals that follow you, serve your communities, and it is a very impactful concept. Although I argue that the concept of servant leadership itself has existed for thousands of years. You can go back to the earliest texts that we have in existence, and you will see, such as in the earliest texts of the Bible and other documents, you'll see that notion of being a servant to people when you are in a leadership role is so important. And you can find throughout history, going back thousands of years, in most any country, you can find individuals that really served their countries, served their communities, and did so in a very selfless manner by thinking of others. Perhaps even during times of war, when people went out of their way and even gave up their lives for their country. They served their country. Those are just a few examples of servant leaders. Now, the values of the servant leader, and therefore the values that would take place in a servant leadership culture, would include things like selfless behavior, caring for others, serving others, authentic behavior I already addressed, where you are transparent and accepting of others, you're honest. Kinship, which essentially is this concept of being forgiving of others and trusting, collaborating with other individuals. Religious, so this comes from, again, Robert Greenleaf and his thoughts on servant leadership. There is a religious component to it. And I guess the easiest way of looking at that is you do not have to belong to a formal religion. You do not even have to necessarily be religious to value religious principles. Although, through my research of religious individuals, there is sort of an added component of serving communities within also the religious community. In other words, research will show that religious people are commonly more giving, and a number of attributes of religious people. So again, I just want to stress the importance that you do not have to be religious to value the religious principles and to value others that are religious and to expect them. There's a great book by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks that talks about the relationship between science and religion and how the two are both needed in societies to prosper. And throughout history, when one or the other has essentially dominated, it has led to significant problems and even downfalls of society. So it's so important to have both. And then finally, being influential. Just the notion of being humble and honest and trusting all of those, you can be influential. But also when you're influential, when you value that, you will also value helping others, being a mentor, modeling the behaviors of a leader. In other words, not just talking about what you expect others to do, but also modeling and exhibiting those behaviors yourself. You're inspirational, and you're visionary. You provide your community, your family, your friends, your organization a vision for what they could pursue and achieve. So what you've seen here is a whole number of not just these core values, but also the various behaviors associated with these values. Let's take a moment to recognize the importance of the notion that anyone can be a leader. I think that's very important for you and others to understand, because you do not have to have a formal position, a formal title to be an effective leader. And this is very critical to understand, particularly within organizations, because there are only limited amount of positions within organizations. In other words, if it's a small company, maybe there's only one manager, that person at the top. There's maybe a president of the organization with 20 people doing the work. Larger organizations, 100, 200, 1,000, may have the top manager, the chief executive officer or president or director of that organization with a number of supervisors that would report to that person and others below that. But there's still limited spots. And for extremely large organizations, including countries, you only have a limited number of positions that people can essentially serve in with that title. However, there's an infinite amount of opportunities for anyone to serve as a leader. You will find that throughout history, many of the greatest leaders did not have a formal position or title. This is again extremely important because to create first off, not just a servant leadership culture, but a leadership culture, we need to recognize that ideally everyone within that culture exhibits leadership behaviors. That is also, again, why I use servant leadership as the example, because not everyone can be charismatic. Not everyone perhaps can be transformational, if you will, but everyone can practice the acts of honesty and forgiveness. Everyone can respect others and try to collaborate by listening carefully to others. Everyone with an organization can be caring of others and respect differences and diversity. Everyone within the organization can help mentor others by helping people be more successful on the job. All of these behaviors can be exhibited by anyone within the workplace, and therefore anyone can be a leader within the workplace. And by promoting this philosophy, then you can really create a leadership-oriented culture within the workplace. You will see here that, as the great Martin Luther King Jr. stated, everybody can be great because anybody can serve. So this is consistent with what I've been describing, and that can be very motivating and very reassuring for individuals within the workplace that may have a lower education, may not have the drive for or opportunities or desire, motivation, or again, like I said, the opportunity to obtain positions in a supervisory role or whatever it may be, yet they want to lead. They want to feel as though they are contributing to their community at work and great in the greater community that they serve in, and they can do that. So this is just an extremely important lesson to understand. And to build that leadership culture, this is a lesson that needs to be promoted and taught to everyone within the workplace and within the community, that anyone can be a servant leader. A couple more examples is you can have coaches of sports teams or various teachers in the form of various arts or wherever it may be. You can have fathers and mothers. You can brothers and sisters, friends that can all help each other and serve as leaders. Now, for those of you that question perhaps the evidence of servant leadership, particularly, there's been a significant amount of research that has been performed on the topic of servant leadership in the workplace. And what you'll find here is I've summarized a few articles over the last decade or a little bit more. And you will find that there are significant relationships between people that are servant leaders and servant leadership cultures that value these behaviors. There are significant relationships between, for instance, job satisfaction, well-being, lower levels of turnover, psychological safety. In other words, people feel good about being at a job and safe at being at a job. Again, another study here, lower levels of turnover. Cohesion among group members. So groups, teams are closer together when they are exhibiting servant leadership behaviors. Higher levels of performance, organizational citizenship behaviors, meaning people are contributing to not just the workplace, but their local community as workers. They're giving more. Generosity, okay? Kindness among each other. How important is kindness? Simple kindness. That's a global phenomena. that people want to simply receive and then, of course, exhibit kindness to each other. And again, various areas of performance, from individual to team to company. And then finally, areas like forgiveness and even not just emotional health, but physical health, greater levels when you have a servant leadership culture. As C.S. Lewis stated, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. That is a great statement. Humility, by the way, is a behavior exhibited by servant leaders. And that's just a great statement to really emphasize, for instance, managers to be thinking less of themselves and thinking more of the followers they have and putting them first. And the results, as we see here, are significant. Matter of fact, in my own research I've conducted, what I've found is significant relationships among these various behaviors, such as, I have a few highlighted here, people that are more religious, that's associated with greater moral behavior. Higher levels of moral behavior is associated with people that are more influential. And another example that I've highlighted here is people that are selfless, which is at the core of being a servant leader. You're more selfless. You're more focused on others rather than yourself. And that's associated at very high levels with greater unity and kinship within teams, for instance. This research that I conducted, and when I discovered these things, essentially confirmed some of the research that we just went over. But for me as an individual, it really confirmed again, the positive relationships and the positive impact that servant leadership can have. And again, I must emphasize that servant leadership, I'm not just promoting servant leadership, but leadership in general. I believe that servant leadership is at the core, at the foundation, if you will, of most any other leadership style. I'll talk about that again throughout this presentation. Now, something that's very important about leadership, let's say versus management, is that leadership is focused more on influence, while management is focused more on power. And here's some examples. When you influence people, you care about them, you're going to influence them. Think about people in your past where they cared about you. Think about how influential they were, starting with, for instance, a parent. You may have had a parent that was very caring of you and very caring of other family members, and they had perhaps one of the most profound impacts on you throughout your life. They significantly influenced you. You may have had teachers in the past that they just really cared about you as an individual and really helped you succeed throughout your education. Therefore, they influenced you. And many times you may talk about them in the future so that influence actually spreads. I'll show you another example of that shortly. Also, to influence people means that you're collaborating with them. If you're telling them what to do, that's exhibiting power. But if you are collaborating with individuals, now you are making an attempt, perhaps, to influence them, but you are influencing each other. And by collaborating with individuals, which collaboration is a servant leadership behavior, you are now creating this leadership culture that we can collaborate, we can talk about challenges and work through them, rather than a few people. Again, remember, management, there are few positions, limited positions. If it is a management style, a power-focused culture, then it's giving orders, and you have essentially less collaboration, which means decreased amount of innovation, decreased creativity, decreased continuous improvement. When you are collaborating, involving everyone within the organization or the greater community, you get more collaboration, you get more ideas being shared, and subsequently more innovation, more of a continuous improvement focus. Influence is also about education. Right now, I'm trying to educate you on this important topic. Therefore, hopefully I'm influencing you. I'm not forcing you to take this approach to your organization or your community or your family. However, hopefully through my education of the importance of leadership, and in this case, servant leadership, hopefully I'm influencing you and hopefully others to become better leaders within your communities. Training and development or developing leaders, also that provides influence. So in other words, I have trained many people on the topic of servant leadership. I continue to do that, and hopefully by training them how to actually apply these behaviors, because it is not always easy to forgive. It is not always easy to trust people. It's not always easy to collaborate with individuals. However, there are ways to do that more effectively. You don't have to agree with anybody. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting is you are willing to listen and collaborate and so on, as I've already talked about. And so if you are trained and developed on how to do that, then you will become a much better leader and you will become much more influential. Now, on the other hand, what you may be more familiar with within the workplace, for instance, or perhaps some of you that have families where you have a very sort of power-oriented leader of that family, well, then that person that exhibits power may be caring more for themselves. For instance, the managers may be more cared about how their team performs that day or that week, because they want to show their superiors that they're doing a good job as a manager. Therefore, they care more about themselves than the followers. They're more likely to give orders. So rather than slowing down, taking time to collaborate, instead it's you do this, you do that, delegation, here is your job, go out and do that. I must emphasize that there are times for that. However, there needs to be a balance. There needs to be a balance between leadership and power, because at times power is that notion that you must give orders is needed. Perhaps during times of crisis where there is not time to collaborate, something just needs to be done. If some machinery, for instance, some equipment breaks down, it may very well be that you need to give orders to get that quickly fixed. Although, with that being said, again, a balance. Even taking a moment to ask the people that work on that machinery in that example what they think, how we can maybe quickly get that problem resolved. Taking that moment as a manager demonstrates leadership and can rectify the situation, improve the problem, fix the problem in a much better manner. Power is also about dictating. So that's similar to giving orders. You're essentially saying, this is the way this organization is going to be structured. This is what's going to happen. This is how I view the community, and therefore you need to follow so that way we achieve the goals that I've set for you. Education to some degree is discouraged, meaning individuals that have power and do not want to lose that power may feel compelled to not educate people on what they're doing, for instance, for their own job or their position, because they may feel if they teach others what they are doing, they are more likely to perhaps be thrown out of their position or lose that position of authority, of power, and someone else will take it. So potentially education is discouraged rather than encouraged for those people that are trusting in their abilities, trusting in others, and recognize how influence can be so much more effective. And finally, limiting growth and development. So that's similar to limiting education. You're limiting opportunities for others to be able to grow within the organization. Oftentimes you find this, let's say, in corrupt governments, various organizations where you have corrupt managers and individuals that do not want to give up that power, so they limit the opportunities for their followers. Now, here's something interesting to consider. I briefly suggested this earlier, and that is when you're focused on power, there's only a limited amount of power. So in other words, you have only this circle of individuals that you are sort of in control over. You have certain responsibilities you are in control over, or you may feel like you have control over them. And by giving up some of that power, you have less, someone else has more. So in this little example that I have for you here, there may be these like 5 units of power. And if you give 1 unit of power away, you only have 4. You give that up. However, when it comes to influence, when you influence others, you do not lose any influence. You still have your original influence. You're still influential. But you've now influenced others who in turn will influence more. You will influence more. So it expands and expands and expands, so you never give up anything. Instead, your own influence grows. Now, one might, to some degree, argue as your influence grows, so does your power. But I want to use that very cautiously because, again, I must emphasize the limitations associated with power. But if you look at some of that balance, when you do need to make some of those decisions, as I mentioned earlier, that may involve power. It may involve, listen, here's what we need to do, and we need to do it quickly. So therefore, and you delegate. Well, the greater your influence, the more likelihood that when that power needs to be exhibited and that power needs to be shared, then you're also more effective. Now, let's take a moment to look at what I would consider this leadership-oriented culture. First off, the leader, so here's another way of looking at leaders versus managers, similarly how I looked at the difference between power and influence. The leader is more long-term oriented, future thinking. So in other words, as a leader, I'm less concerned about today than I am at next week. I'm less concerned about this month than I am next year and the years to come. Future thinking, long-term thinking. I also engage workers. I'm more likely to empower workers to give the ability to those followers, not just workers, but to those followers to make decisions on their own. By doing this, therefore, you engage people within. If it's in the workplace, you engage them within that workplace and making decisions. If it's within your community, you are not just having large volumes of laws and rules. Rather, you're engaging community members to create a better community. Also, being a leader means asking questions and listening. Rather than dictating, rather than telling people what to do, it's more asking questions, seeing how people are doing, seeing what they think, seeing how processes can be improved, and so on. And of course, cross-training. I mentioned that earlier, that the leader is going to value training others, so that way when problems do occur, other people are very well trained to step in and serve. Matter of fact, this is probably a good opportunity to recognize that this, as I mentioned several times, this does not have to be just in the workplace. Think about this, even in your own family. If you are engaging your children, or if siblings are engaging each other and helping each other learn how to do different things within their family, well then when a family member, let's say, becomes sick, well then other people can quickly step in and help. So that is also, cross-training can be literally within the smaller units of families and friends and communities. And then finally, vision. The leader thinks long-term. They have great vision. So for that parent, they have that vision of where their family might be in 10 and 20 years. They're thinking long-term. That in the workplace, that leadership culture values vision. Everyone's engaged in that mindset that we want to look in the future to see where we want this organization to be. Where do we want us as employees to be? Where do we see ourselves in the future? Now the manager is thinking more short-term. Daily, quarterly numbers. They're thinking logistics. How do I get products from here to there? How many people do I need to accomplish, loading this merchandise into this truck, or who needs to go over here to fix this plumbing? Who needs to operate on these individuals? Who is the best qualified to do this job? That's logistics. That's getting things done and where it needs to go. That's manager-related duties. They're more task-oriented, as I've described. Instruction-oriented and delegation. So in other words, this needs to be done today. Your team is now responsible for that. It's delegating. And then a bit more of a narrow focus. In other words, a manager may have their team to worry about. Another manager has their team to worry about, so they're very narrowly focused on what their direct responsibilities are. Now, what I'm going to show you here, I will describe this model I created and demonstrate how, yes, you indeed need effective managers, but you also need effective leaders. So for the leader, as I've already described, is they're someone that values others, they are encouraging, they're visionary, and so on. So you need these things in order to be innovative. And then, of course, you need managers in order to get those daily tasks done. So both are needed. So in this model I've created for you, if you'll see here in, for instance, the lower left quadrant, it says ineffective climate and culture. Essentially what that means is that you have, right here, you have low management, okay, low management skills, meaning you have managers that are just not effective. Perhaps they're not properly trained on how to delegate. Maybe there were people that were promoted because they did well before, but now they're managers and they just simply cannot supervise. They cannot communicate well. So that would be like low management. And then low leadership would be having a culture where leadership is not even thought of, is not even a part of the conversation. In other words, people are just managers and nobody is really providing any sort of vision for the organization. Nobody really cares about the followers, the employees. They're just simply focused more on themselves. So that's where you get this ineffective climate and culture. And that is all too often too common, particularly in organizations that will soon experience decline and failure. Now, you may also have, and that's, let's say, in this lower right quadrant down here, you might have where you have a high management culture, but a low leadership culture. So what you have there is perhaps highly successful individuals where they're successful at their jobs. They're meeting quarterly numbers. A sales team is selling a lot, and an accounting team is making only a few errors or no errors. You have a distribution team that's getting out orders on time. All that is due to good management. However, those experiences can be short-lived unless you have vision. And so in this area, you're lacking vision, you're lacking innovation. You will see across the world companies that were very prosperous, but then have disappeared. In America, you have companies like Blockbuster is a common example that people talk about, where Blockbuster, before videos like this were streaming, before you had the internet, you had VCRs and even, I can't remember if they had DVDs, but you had where you could go into a store to rent a movie. Okay, that concept was there before. Now all we have to do is stay at home and click on a button, even on our smartphones, and we are able to access movies and videos and such, just like, again, like you are right now. Well, arguably, the people that were the decision makers within the company did not have those leadership qualities of vision. Perhaps there are other factors, but arguably, again, vision was lacking and other leadership skills were lacking. Otherwise, the company would have been better prepared to recognize change coming up in the future and adapted accordingly and then stayed in existence. Now, in the upper left quadrant, we have something that I think would probably be much more rare. I cannot think of an organization necessarily offhand, other than maybe an academic institution. So I'll talk about that in a moment here as an example. Not one in specific, but just in general. And this is where you'd have maybe low management skills and high leadership skills. Like I said, I think this is rather rare. In this case, you might have the high potential for leadership, so that's a good thing. There's a great potential for leadership. Potential is good. But perhaps there needs to be restructuring and training. The reason why I mentioned academia is because you may have a school, for instance, that has a lot of people that have great educations, and many of them may be, leadership oriented, where, hey, we need to engage our employees, we need to engage our students, we need to, We see that down the road we need to perhaps be more virtually focused, online education, for instance, versus the more traditional face-to-face education. So lots of leadership, but you still need to get the job done. You still need individuals that are willing to make the tough decisions, to perhaps fire employees that are not working out and hire new ones that are. You need people that are out there doing marketing and getting students and buying the equipment that's needed to transition to this vision that we have. So you need a combination of both, and in this case it'd be lacking. But again, of course, opportunity to train. And then finally you have what I would consider, I guess, that ideal leadership culture, where you not just value management and you not just value training people on task management and the skills that are needed to be good managers and employees, but you also are valuing leadership and caring of others, and again, thinking vision, thinking continuous improvement. Then you are going to get innovation, and you're going to be properly prepared to apply the skills needed to innovate. So you have the mindset, the vision, the engagement of everybody, and then once decisions are made and once things need to change, you have people also that are capable and willing to do the work. That is that ideal leader, manager, workplace culture. Now, here's another model I created for you to help you better understand how this can actually take place. Now, many of you might find this maybe much different than you're used to. What I have here is a traditional hierarchy where you have people here on the bottom of this pyramid where they have no formal title. Those are your frontline workers. Then you have others that are supervisors, team leads, whatever the name you might have for those individuals. Then you have, again, higher level managers, higher level directors, and ultimately you have those senior executives within the organization that may be the chief executive officer, the president of the organization, the board of directors. Now, the idea here is not just to cross-train at the lowest levels. In other words, if I'm a secretary and someone else is in charge of accounting or something like that, or not just, I shouldn't say in charge of accounting, but actually doing some of the accounting, well, maybe they're trained to do some of my jobs as a secretary, so therefore, if I'm out sick, they can also do that job. So that is some of that cross-training at the lowest levels that many of us might be familiar with. What I'm suggesting here is that cross-training continues. This is leadership. This is now taking the frontline employees, plumbers, welders, whoever it is on these front lines, various teachers, firefighters, whoever it may be, the lower level military personnel, and cross-training them and helping them develop as leaders to that next level. So those frontline employees are now learning what it takes to be a supervisor, and not just learning about it, but doing it. So in other words, you as the supervisor are sharing your responsibilities. Remember, this is not about power, it's about influence. Therefore, you are influencing your employees by helping them share in some of the responsibilities so they learn more about your role. You, in turn, as a supervisor, perhaps are sharing in some of the responsibilities of your manager. So that way, if the manager's for some reason leaves or gets promoted, you can very quickly step in. If you leave or are promoted, someone on the front lines can very quickly step in. And all the way up this pyramid, everyone is being cross-trained, everyone is being developed to be able to quickly step into various positions. Think about how effective a model like this can be, because this is a very much so a leadership model, developing people and recognizing long-term. Now what happens is if you have a key individual within your organization leave, so let's say it's due to death, let's say it's due to they get a job that they go to another company, all of a sudden there's not so much of a void or a significant vacancy that is difficult to fill. By following a leadership model like this and a culture that's a leadership-oriented culture, people can very quickly step in, and you maintain, from the management side, you maintain the bottom line, you maintain the numbers, you maintain the high sales, the high quality product, the high quality service. You maintain those things because you have this leadership-oriented culture. Now, finally, I'll leave you with this, and that is to create a culture of leadership. What can we do? What can we do to find and develop the undiscovered leaders? That is a question you need to ask yourself. And arguably, by following the model that I've created for you earlier here, that is one way of doing that. People can step into other roles. Some are going to work out, some will not. But at least you are now in a position to start identifying some of those significant leaders that are within your organization and community. Then by doing so, now these people can step in when needed. Now consider this. If you consider leadership and leaders, individuals, as assets, well, any organization or community, if you have assets, you want to leverage those assets. You want to use them. If you have a building sitting somewhere and it's vacant, it's empty, you want to use that building. You want to perhaps rent it out, lease it out. You want to perhaps expand your organization and fill that building with new employees that are building new products or whatever it is. That's an asset. Again, you want to leverage that asset. You want to use it. However, we have individuals and organizations that are not being utilized. If you think of your employees or your community members, or for that matter, your family members as assets to that particular local community and organization, well, if you have undiscovered leaders, those are underutilized assets. So by identifying individuals as leaders and embracing that and taking advantage of that, so that way these individuals, and I mean taking advantage in a good way, helping them grow and develop as leaders, and then in turn helping them engage others and utilize their leadership abilities. Now you're using those assets, and you are in turn, again, taking full advantage of all the assets that you have within your organization. Not just those hard assets, not just those buildings, computers, machinery, but also the people. I do want to thank you today. I hope you enjoyed our discussion about how to develop a leadership culture, particularly with emphasis on servant leadership and learning to care and focus and develop your followers, so that way you truly create a leadership culture, and by doing so, create an unending list of positive solutions to many of the global challenges that we have within the workplace, our communities, and our families. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Dr. Dan Kahinka, and I do appreciate your time, and I hope you have a very blessed and wonderful day. Thank you.